Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Well, thank you, Governor Sununu. Thank you not only for that, boy, that great pep rally. I feel like we should go out and start charging the hill right now. We were pumped up, and you made a great case there. Thank you for the wonderful induction. But most of all, thank you for your leadership in the party, in the state, and in this country. It's been an honor for Tonette and I to be here tonight, not only with Governor Sununu, but Nancy and Mrs. Sununu is here as well. So we appreciate you've got two First Ladies in the back there. And I, too, want to begin by adding my thanks to Jennifer Horn and the entire state party team. Jennifer, you've done a great job yet again, so thank you for your leadership with this great couple days here. And before I get into this, I just want to begin right off the bat, because I'm going to talk a lot tonight and end up a little bit before we take some questions talking about freedom. But one of the interesting things about freedom is it's certainly something that's endowed by our Creator. It's defined by the Constitution, but each and every day it's defended by the men and women who proudly wear the uniform of these United States. And I know amongst us we've got some folks who are active in the military today, be it in the active duty of the Guard or the Reserve. We've got folks who are veterans of military service in the past, and we've got some family members who've got loved ones in the services. So would you just stand for a moment so we can recognize that? That kind of puts it all right back into perspective right off the bat. I've got a patch I carry. I know Governor Sununu, you know this, having served as governor, being commander-in-chief, it's an important thing. All the different deployments we go to and the welcome homes. Actually, one of the best parts of my job is welcome homes. I'm like a kid. I get up about 5:30 in the morning, anxious to see, because you see all these families, you see the kids, you see the loved ones. Actually, last year I had over at Volk Field, one of our bases in Wisconsin. One of the funniest scenes I ever had was all these families there, and there was a dad with 3 kids, and his wife was deployed. She was coming home, and he wasn't just excited, he was exhausted. He just had to look like, okay, she's taking the kids, I don't care, I'm just going to collapse right here. But to see these families, to see how pumped up the kids are, it's phenomenal. But it's a great reminder that sometimes we forget about this because it doesn't get talked about enough in the press. But we still got men and women deployed right now. And so and we will for the foreseeable future, regardless of the president. We need to be mindful of that as we go forward. Tonight, I also want to begin by saying thanks, not just for having Tonette and I. We're honored to be back here in New Hampshire. I wore a suit tonight. I didn't wear the $1 sweater like I did the last time from Kohl's. Although I think the shirt is from Kohl's, the press was asked me for the suits from Joseph A. Bank. So I guess I didn't get that at Kohl's. But I saw a couple others out here. A couple guys said the 3 of us stood together, took a picture. I said the 3 of us together made the price of 1 suit. So that's pretty good, right? That's 4. I get the 4th throw in, 1 for, and 2 shirts on a sale on the weekend. But we'd all set. But it's. I just want to thank you all, not just for having us, but I talked to a number of folks. We had sessions earlier today here and a couple other spots around town, and so many of you have told us, as you have in past visits, so many folks mentioned to us that you helped us out. Some of you sent $20 or $30 along the way, and we appreciate that. Some of you literally physically came to Wisconsin in the recall, and others made calls online for us. And just about everybody I bumped into said you prayed for Tonette and I and our family. So from that personally, on behalf of our family, to all of you who did that for us, particularly in the recall, thank you, because that meant the world to us. It's interesting. Sometimes it seems like that was an eternity ago. But literally about 4 years ago at this point, I think Time Magazine or one of the publications had a headline that said, "Dead Man Walker." And that was because my polls were so low. You know, I'd come in trying to fix things. One of the critical mistakes I acknowledged from what we did 4 years ago is I was so eager to fix things, I didn't bother talking about it. I just went in and fixed it, because usually in politics, politicians talk about it and never fix it. So if I got to err, I guess I err on that side. I've now learned you got to listen, talk, and act in that order, but not leave out any of the 3 out there. But as I looked at that process, it was interesting. We were so eager to fix things, we just did it. And in reaction, the national big government unions, the big government special interests out there, the bosses, came in and took us on. I mean, literally, they brought, within the first week, there were a few thousand protesters the first couple days. By about the end of the first week, they had bussed in, flown in, chartered in, people from all across the country. And so at one point, at about this point, a little bit earlier in March of 2011, into February of 2011, we had over 100,000 protesters in and around our capital. And then we had threats. We had death threats against me, against our family, against members of the state legislature, particularly in our state Senate and our state assembly. And it was overwhelming. And it was a great reminder to me as that was happening that back a few years earlier, early in 2009, Tonette and I had sat down and thought about, talked about, ultimately prayed about getting in the race for governor. And the reason I tell you that was because it kind of put in perspective what we were doing and why we were doing it. And back then, we decided, we've got two sons who today are 19 and 20. In fact, one of them is going to be in state this coming week when he's doing some stuff with college students in and around the area. I met some great college students earlier today. And but we had done it back then. Our kids were in high school. And we did it because we wanted to make sure our sons could grow up in a state that was at least as great as the state we grew up in. Ideally better. And so we knew it would be a risk, but we got in that race for governor, even though our state hasn't gone Republican for president since 1984. Put that in perspective, that was when I was in high school, and I still had a full head of hair. So that's a long time ago. But along the way, we thought it was worth it because we wanted our sons to do better than we had. And we knew it would be difficult to win, and then we knew when we got in, it wouldn't be an easy task, but thankfully the voters in our state not only elected me, they elected new majorities in the Assembly, in the state Senate, they elected a new U.S. Senator, they elected 2 new members of the House of Representatives. I remember about a week after the election, I got together in the Capitol with all the Republicans, those in office and those newly elected in the legislature, and I said, it's put up or shut up time. And the reason I said that was I point out to them that Democrats had controlled everything, and the state voters had flipped it all to Republican. And if we just nibbled around the edges and were a little bit less bad than the Democrats, the voters would have every right to throw us out. So instead I said, we need to go big. We need to go bold. We need to show we were dramatically different than the party we replaced. I don't think anybody looking at what we've done over the last 4 years would doubt that we went big and we went bold. And the reason it sustained us during all the protests, all the attacks, all the abuse, all the death threats and everything else was we knew, in my case, for Tonette and I, we knew it was because of Matt and Alex and all the others in their generation, all the other sons and daughters like them, all the other grandsons and granddaughters. We knew it was not acceptable not to have a state that was better than the one we inherited. And so we took on the big challenges. And it wasn't just about taking on protests. I mean, we had to bring together Republicans in both houses of the state legislature. We were talking about this at dinner. One house more than the other that wasn't that thrilled to go down that path. Because much like sometimes we see in Washington, sometimes there are people who have been there a long time who really like the status quo. Even sometimes in our own party. They don't want to change things. But we had to make the case for why reform was necessary. And I would argue today, some 4 years later, we're much better off for it on multiple levels. From the economy, early in 2010, our unemployment rate was 9.2%. Just this last Thursday, it's down to 4.6%. And to me, equally as exciting is it's because we have what's called a labor participation rate, meaning the number of people working in our state is over 2/3. That's well above the national rate. So unemployment's lower, labor participation is much higher. That's important because it means people are working and we're finding more jobs and more opportunity out there. We took a $3.6 billion budget deficit and turned it into a surplus. In fact, we've done it in each of the last 4 years, and the budget I introduced back at the beginning of February ends with a nearly $500 million surplus going forward. We've got the largest, the largest rainy day fund we've ever had in our state's history, 165 times bigger than we took office. We have the only pension system fully funded in the country. We have a debt and pension ratio that's one of the lowest out there. I mentioned that about the pension. A few lawmakers earlier were particularly excited because they said that's not always the case here and elsewhere around the country. And so we're proud of that. But we did some other things, too. We didn't just take on our fiscal and economic issues. We took on other issues. For example, a lot of people don't know this, but in our state, we got rid of seniority and tenure. That means we can hire based on merit. We can pay based on performance. We can put the best and the brightest in our classrooms, and we can pay them to be there. That's a pretty big deal. And it makes our schools better. In fact, our schools today, 4 years after our reforms, have higher graduation rates, have better third grade reading scores, and now have the second best ACT scores in the country for states where more than half the kids take the test. That showed you that despite all the hype that you heard from the left and the protesters and the others out there 4 years ago, our reforms actually worked. Actually worked going forward. And sometimes people are surprised too. It's not just about taking on unions. We took on other big government special interests along the way. We leveled off our regulatory environment, so what we enforce is about common sense, not about bureaucratic red tape. We reined in the lawsuit environment so that we now have pulled back on the ability to have frivolous and out-of-control lawsuits. We took away the controversy, and we no longer fund Planned Parenthood in the state of Wisconsin. We passed major pro-life legislation as well. We signed concealed carry and the Castle Doctrine so that law-abiding citizens can have access to firearms to protect themselves and their family and their loved ones. We passed, and just about a month ago, the U.S. Supreme Court took action to allow us to once again uphold the law I signed to say that if you want to vote in the state of Wisconsin, you have to carry a photo ID to prove who you are. And earlier this year, I signed into law legislation that now makes it the case that Wisconsin's the 25th state in the country to have right to work, so you don't have to be a part of a labor union if you want to work in the state of Wisconsin. Now, I tell you all that because remember back at the beginning I said when I thought about running for governor it wouldn't be easy. That's because this is a state that hasn't gone Republican for president since 1984. We did all that early on because we decided to go big and go bold. We didn't hold back. We said it's put up or shut up time. If we were going to show the voters of our state that we could get things done, we needed to do it, and we needed to do it early. And that's something I think that needs to happen in this country as well, because for Matt and Alex, Tonette and I's two sons, and for my nieces Isabella and Eva, and for all the other sons and daughters like them, I'm optimistic about the future in this country despite some of the challenges we face today, because I look at what's happening in Wisconsin and Michigan and Ohio and Florida and other states across this country, and I see if you put common sense Republican conservative leadership in place in the chief executive and the legislative branch, if that team works together, there's no end to the good things that can happen in the states. If we do that in Washington with a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a new Republican president, there's no end to how much better things can be in this country. And let me give you 3 examples of where I think the contrast is important. First off, I think we need to start talking more about growth. For balanced budgets, I took a $3.6 billion budget deficit, one of the biggest in state's history, one of the biggest per capita in the country, and I turned it into a surplus, working together with our legislative branch. But we didn't do that just by cutting. We didn't just do that through austerity. We did it through growth and reform. We empowered the people who create jobs to do that. Unfortunately, when I listen to this president, people like Hillary Clinton, I think they've got it all backwards. Somehow they seem to think the way to grow the economy is to grow Washington. I mean, look at it. In the last year alone, 6 of the top 10 wealthiest counties in America, you know where they came from? In and around Washington, D.C. That tells you they believe you grow the economy in Washington. I think the vast majority of us across America, we believe you grow the economy in cities and towns and villages all across this great country, that people create jobs, not the government. It's about time to get the government out of the way. That means we need to have a competitive tax code in this country, not just reform it, but lower the marginal tax burdens. Make America competitive again on a global stage so we can bring more American jobs back from overseas to put more of our fellow Americans back to work. And it's one of those where we need to put more money back in the hands of American consumers. Some of you heard me joking about that $1 sweater, but I love to tell that story about why I'm so focused on cutting taxes. In my state, we've cut taxes the last 4 years by $2 billion. We cut it on income, on property, on employers. In fact, property taxes today in Wisconsin are 4 years later lower on a typical home than they were 4 years ago, and our budget's completed in a few months. They'll be lower at the end of 2016 than they were at the end of 2010. What governor in America can say that? Now, people often say, why are you so focused on reducing the tax burden? I say it's simple. It's simple. It's a simple story out there. And I explain it in terms of something. Some of you have heard me say this before, but Tonette and I have been married, as of February 6th, we've been married 22 years. We're proud of that. Those applause are really for her for putting up with me for 22 years. But Tonette and I were married on February 6, 1993, and not long after that, I made a critical mistake. I went to Kohl's department stores and I bought something for the price it was marked at. None of you who've shopped at Kohl's know what I'm talking about, right? So now, if I'm going to go buy a new shirt, kind of like the one I'm wearing here, what do? I go up to the rack that says it was $29.99, and it's marked down to $19.99. And then I go up to the front and I either get out the insert from the Sunday paper with the scratch off that gets me another 10 or 15% off, or maybe because we get stuff in the mail from us all the time, I take the 15 or 20% if we're really lucky, the 30% off mark that I take up to the cash register, and they mark it down a little bit further, and then we pull the Kohl's cash out of our pocket or Tonette out of her purse, and next thing you know, they're paying me to buy that shirt. Right? Right? Well, not quite, but it's close, right? So how does Kohl's make money? How do they make money? Volume. You got it. They make money off of volume. They could sell a few of those shirts at $29.99, or they could lower the price, broaden the volume, get more people to purchase their products, and next thing you know, they're making more money. Well, that's how I think about your money, the taxpayers' money. The government could charge you a higher rate, and a few of you could afford it. Or we could lower the rates, broaden the base, have more people participate in the economy, and fare better off of volume. It's a simple concept. I call it the Kohl's curve. With all deference to my friend Art Laffer, it's the Kohl's curve in my mind. That's how you got to think about things, and that's how we need to explain things. It doesn't hurt either that I doubt the presumptive nominee for the other party's ever been to Kohl's before, let alone shopped in the last 18 or 20 years, but I think about that and explain it's not just about lowering the tax burden. It's ultimately about doing other things that promote growth. It's about reining in out-of-control federal regulations. It's about repealing Obamacare and allowing patients and families to make decisions about health care. It's about an all-the-above energy policy that says we're going to use the abundant supplies that we have here in America and in this continent instead of relying on places around the world that hate us. We're going to focus on things that promote growth, and when we do, we not only grow the economy and put more people to work and put them in the better jobs than the ones they have and help raise wages, we ultimately put ourselves in a position where we help lower the debt and deficit problem by raising the amount of revenues, not through higher rates, but by spreading that volume just like we do at Kohl's. So first of all, we need to focus more on growth. Secondly, we need to talk more about reform. And again, this is where there's a stark contrast. I mean, think about it. We got a president right now in Washington. In fact, I think about Washington often. I love to go to Washington. I love flying in by the monuments, and I love it even more when I fly home. Because to me, Washington is 68 square miles surrounded by reality. And so it's nice to be out with everybody in reality again. But I think about this president and people like Hillary Clinton, and they seem to measure success in government by how many people are dependent on the government, right? By how many people are on Medicaid and food stamps and unemployment. We should measure success by just the opposite, by how many people are no longer dependent on the government. No longer dependent on the government, because we understand that true freedom and prosperity does not come from the mighty hand of the government. It comes from empowering people to live their own lives and control their own destinies through the dignity that is born of work. Born of work out there. It's interesting. As a kid, I grew up in a small town, Delavan. In fact, Paul Ryan was on one side of me. Reince Priebus was on the other. Go figure. Along the way. But my first job was washing dishes at the Countryside restaurant. I moved up to the big time in high school. I flipped hamburgers at McDonald's. Congressman King, you'll get a kick out of this kid Paul about this, but Paul Ryan was flipping burgers in Janesville when I was flipping burgers in Delavan. The only difference is his manager told him he didn't have the interpersonal skills to work the front cash register, so he had to flip hamburgers in the back. It's true. My manager might have thought that, but she didn't tell me that. But I think about that, and I think about not just my early jobs, but I think about my parents. My dad was a preacher. My mom was a part-time secretary. She raised my brother and I. I think about my grandparents. My mother's parents were farmers that didn't have indoor plumbing until my mother went off to junior high school. My dad's dad, my Grandpa Walker, was a machinist for nearly 40 years at Barbara Coleman. When I think about my family, my parents and my grandparents, and the jobs I started out early on Delavan, I realized my brother and I didn't inherit fame or fortune, but we inherited something even better. The belief that if you work hard and you play by the rules, you can do and be anything you want in America. That's the American dream. We need to revive that again in this country. And so we need to put that focus out there. I often laugh when I grew up in Delavan. Not a one of my classmates ever said to me, "Hey, Scott, someday when I grow up, I want to become dependent on the government." Nobody ever said that. Nobody wrote in my yearbook, "Scott, good luck becoming dependent on the government." And that's just not the American dream out there. And yet somehow you listen to people like the President, Hillary Clinton, and others in Washington, they somehow act like that's something we should aspire to. And it's not only for those of us who've been honored to be born in this great country. One of the things I'm always amazed with is I meet people who've come here from other places around the world. Doesn't matter what country they come from. Literally, almost to a person. The people I've been honored to meet over the years, particularly those who are successful small business owners today who've come here from elsewhere around this globe, almost to a person tells me the reason they came to America wasn't to become dependent on the government. It was because in America, it's one of the few places left in the world where it doesn't matter what class you were born into, it doesn't matter what your parents did for a living. In America, you can do and be anything you want. The opportunity is equal to all, but the outcome should still be up to each and every one of us. That's the American dream. We need to be a party that stands up for anyone who wants to work hard and play by the rules and say, we're the ones who are going to champion the American dream here, and the American dream is not being dependent on government. It's appropriate to think about it this past week. I say, if you remember nothing else tonight, remember this. There's a reason we take a day off to celebrate the 4th of July and not the 15th of April. Because in America, we celebrate our independence from the government, not our dependence on it. And the last thing, in addition to growth and reform, the last thing I just want to tell you about for a moment is about safety. It's a safety. I call it safety. Some of you may call it national security. I call it safety because national security is something you read about on page 6A of the newspaper. Safety is something you feel right here. And I've watched as I travel this country. I see it in my own state. I see it elsewhere around this great America that we live in. And as I talk to people, I see person after person who tells me that when we see those video images of a Jordanian pilot being burned alive in a cage, when we see Christians from Egypt being beheaded or others like them, that's something you start to feel. That's safety. That's not just national security, that's safety. And it's so frustrating to me as I see that to think, you know, we've got a president who a couple of years ago drew a line in the sand and then allowed people to cross it. We got a president who calls ISIS, just a year ago, the JV squad, who called Yemen a success story, who called Iran a place we can do business with, who's got a former Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, that actually gave Russia a reset button. Now, Governor Sununu, I'm glad you mentioned Yemen out there because it's amazing to me when I think about this. Not only was the president saying it was a success last fall, even after the Houthis had moved their way, the Shiite-based, Iran-backed Houthis had gone into Yemen, you've got the president's current administration still somehow proclaiming it's a success. How do you say that? When you think about Russia out there, there's a reason why Putin is willing to act. He's a nationalist. Think about it. He knows the old adage from Lenin that you probe with bayonets. And if you find mush, you push. If you find steel, you pull back. In the world today, I was just talking about 2 weeks ago with some of our allies in the Arab world and in the Middle East, and I'm not just talking about Israel, I'm talking about others out there in the Gulf states who actually, I asked them, what's the number one concern you have? Don't tell me about the details of the Iran deal you're concerned with. I asked, what is the number one concern that you have in the world today? You know what the response was? The disengagement of America. Those are our allies in the Arab world and the Middle East. They're worried about the fact that America's not there. They're worried about our presence in the world. Well, I got to tell you, now more than ever, for the sake of my children and your children and those children yet to be born, looking forward, we need a commander-in-chief in this country who once and for all will identify that radical Islamic terrorism is a threat to us all. We need a leader in this country who will identify Israel as an ally and start acting like it again. And we need a president who's going to be honest with the American people and look them straight in the eye and say, this isn't going to happen with a couple bombings. This isn't going to happen with a couple issues here or there. This is a generational issue. And it's not a matter of if there's another attempt on American soil. It is when there's another attempt. And on behalf of our children and future generations, we're not going to wait till they bring the fight to us. We're going to bring the fight to them and fight on their soil and not on ours. And so there are some sharp contrasts out there, not just between this president, but Hillary Clinton, who, as Jennifer and others have said, is really an extension of the third term of Barack Obama. Americans need to realize that. This isn't a third term of Bill Clinton. This is a third term of Barack Obama. And we've got a real choice out there. We've got a real choice. And I, for one, am optimistic about the future because, as Governor Sununu mentioned, I think we have a real opportunity not just to win an election as Republicans, but I think we've got an even better opportunity to chart out a course for how to make America great again. I see it in the states, not just in my states, but other states across the country, where good teams, not just executives, good teams have come together. Republican legislative branch, Republican executive leadership in the governor's office have come together to make their states great again, to be part of remarkable comebacks from one state to the next to the next. We can do the same thing for America. And I would just end with telling you this. It's not just about the states in the last few years. What gives me hope, what gives me optimism is something I look at when I look at this great American history that we have. Years ago, I had a chance to go at a governor's conference to Philadelphia to see Constitution Hall. And for me, it was a treat because as a kid, my family never got a chance to go to Philadelphia, which is too bad because I loved history. I love history. As a kid, I was maybe a little geeky, but I thought of our founders almost like superheroes, bigger than life. And so back in the fall of 2011, Tonette and I got a chance to go to a conference in Philadelphia. We got up early in the morning, went by the Liberty Bell, and then as the sun was coming up early that morning, we went into Independence Hall, and because of my fascination with our founders, I was ready to be blown away. And I looked in that hall, which is as cramped as we are tonight, not much different than the hall we're in right now. And I looked at the desk, and I looked at the chairs, and at that moment it dawned on me. These were ordinary people. These were ordinary people who had done something quite extraordinary. You see, these were people who didn't just risk their political careers. These are folks who didn't just risk their business ventures. These are people who risked their lives for the freedoms we hold dear today. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I'd tell you that moments like that remind me what makes America great, what makes us exceptional, what makes us arguably the greatest country in the history of the world, has been all throughout our nation's history. In moments of crisis, be it economic or fiscal, be it military or spiritual, all throughout our nation's history, what has made us amazing has been in those moments of crisis. There have been men and women of courage, been willing to stand up and think more about the future of their children and their grandchildren than they thought about their own futures. Tonight I would tell you that looking ahead, this is one of those moments. This is one of those times in American history where we can look back and tell future generations, we were there. We heeded the call. We did what was required to make America great again. I am convinced that working together, that's exactly what we can do, and we ask for your help on that path going forward. And with that, I'll take a few questions before they give me the hook or before they throw a dessert at me or something along the way, right? That's all right? Great. Great. We're so comfortable with dinner. Sure. Yeah, and debt and deficit, there's a series of things. And I, first of all, put it in context. When we came in, as I mentioned, in my state 4 years ago, we had inherited a $3.6 billion budget deficit. State's history that was, I think, the second largest per capita. It was one of the biggest in the country. And we not only balanced the books, paid back a huge rate on the state's transportation fund of nearly $1 billion, paid back $250 million that had been rated from the patient compensation fund, did all that while still cutting taxes, and we did it through reform, and we did it through growth. And so looking forward, I think a series of things have to happen. Certainly the part we talked about with growth. Growth has got to be a part of it. We've got to do things that help the American public grow the economy, both as individuals and employers, the things I outlined earlier in the comments. But then as part of reform, I believe we should take major portions of the federal government and send it back to the states. Certainly the Congress, the House has already talked about in the Ryan budget plan about Medicaid. I'd go far further than that with block grants. I'd look at Medicaid, other social services, transportation, workforce development, other issues like that, the whole spectrum of things the federal government currently does, send it back in block grants to the states, be more effective, more efficient, more accountable, certainly more accountable to the public. And then it gives you the leeway, the flexibility to then look at big issues like entitlements and also to look at areas where I do think we need to spend more money, and that is in the Department of Defense. Governor Sununu did a good job of, sure, you can laugh, Frank. Governor Sununu did a good job of summarizing that, but you look at the Navy as an example. I mean, we're at, what, 275, 280 vessels right now. We're headed down toward 250. That's less than half of where we were under Reagan. You look at other components out there, there's some real challenges for us being able to protect ourselves and our interests here and around the world. And so I do think we need to adjust the defense budget. But when it comes to debt and deficit, part of that reform, sending it back to the states, part of it's tackling the bigger issues. And should we be a candidate for this office of president, obviously in the coming months we'll be laying out in greater detail. Sure.
Not a specific question, but I'm blessed to run a 160-person manufacturing employee-owned operation. Could you speak in general about small business, okay, being burdened by regulations that we can't even stay on top of, and opportunities that small businesses give to other people?
Well, you did build it, so for starters, which is a good thing. But I think part of even that mindset's different. I mean, the idea that I believe that people create jobs, not the government. And so starting with that premise that if people create jobs, not the government, one of the best things we can do, not just for small business, but for anybody, I think it's one of the starkest contrasts between, for example, someone like Hillary Clinton and those of us as Republicans, is that Obama and Clinton talking about this top-down government knows best, particularly when it comes to regulation, but other areas, that will tell you what to do, when to do, and how to do it. That is stale, that has failed, that's not good at the federal level, it's not good at the state level, it's not good at the local level. And yet, people like the president and like Hillary Clinton keep pushing that. In contrast, I think we need to say, not just to small business owners, but to young people and anybody else out there, we offer the contrast. We don't believe in top-down, Washington knows best. We believe in bottom-up. We believe that's new and exciting and dynamic, and that's the best way to grow the economy. And one of the best things we can do is say, as long as you don't violate the public health and public safety of your neighbor, go out and do your thing. You want to start a business, you want to start out in your career, you want to go forward. I think it's a pretty refreshing message, not just to small business owners, but to some of the college students I met earlier today, because what they're looking for is some optimism that they can advance their career, that maybe someday they could start a business like yours and others out there. What frustrates me is sometimes I hear from current small business owners who say, if I knew what I knew today, I wouldn't start this business. And that's frustrating because job growth is going to come from new businesses and startups and small businesses that grow. We've got to take away that mindset. And so to me, a big part of it is what we try to do at the state level is true at the federal level. We've got to say, again, unless you're a clear threat to public safety and public health, most of the rest of this should be cleared out of the way. Instead of having costs go around like this to get around taxes and regulatory costs, Why not allow capital to move forward in a way that flows naturally, and that'll help greater investment, put more people to work, raise wages, do more for the American public. Wait, oh, okay, way back, you get the last one. Yeah, well, thanks. Well, one, we'll be, if we chose to get in, obviously been here a couple times. We love coming here. For us, there's a lot of New Hampshire is very similar to Wisconsin, geographically, demographically, and otherwise. So we'll want to spend a lot of time here as we pursue this, and should we get in, for sure, come back and maybe have a little fun. A couple of folks have invited me to Bike Week. I ride... Little known fact, I ride a 2003 Harley-Davidson Road King, 21,000 miles on it, so I either ride my own or pick up one maybe over at the dealership. Maybe not only for that, but this state's nice enough size that I think in 2 days you could probably get through all 10 counties and make a nice road trip around the state. I did that in my last re-election. Some of the most fun is going out on Saturdays and Sundays on the weekends, and instead of doing a whistle stop on a bus, I like doing it in a Harley with about 100, 150 bikers. And there's a few lawmakers that already said they want to go with. So if you ride a motorcycle, we'll even let you in if you're not a Harley rider, but that'd be a lot of fun, and certainly making visits. You know, 3 times in the last 4 years I've run for governor. And so Tonette can vouch for this, but we actually like to campaign. We enjoy meeting people. I got to tell you, one of the greatest blessings for us, she's nodding her head no back there, depends on the day. This is a bad thing about having your spouse sitting right behind you. But we actually have 2 sons, one of which is going to be in state next week, who, should we make this next step forward, are probably likely to take a semester off or more to go out and campaign with us, who want to go into college campuses and do some of that. So we'll be back with that. If that goes forward, we'll be back not just on the road trip, but on town hall meetings and other. We do a lot of that. I love going to factories. I love going to farms. I can go to your factory if you want. And I'm inviting myself in everywhere. That's right. Love going to small businesses and farms and others along the way. What I've always found is that's a great way. For me, when I was first a lawmaker, I loved knocking on doors because people are real when you're at their house. Congressman, you probably get this. They'll tell you the truth, and they're all, at least in our state, they're pretty polite even if they don't agree with you in front of their house. Maybe not elsewhere, but I like that kind of interaction. And the other part for us that's nice is this state. I think having looked at this, been here a number of times, and talking to enough folks about it, fits well with what we've done in each of the last 3 elections, and that is we won almost universal support amongst Republicans. 96% of the Republican vote the last election. That means that's the high, other than Terry Branstad, nobody else is higher. Terry and I are about the same in Iowa. He's got, I think, 97. I got 96, so we're right there. 104, yeah, 104. But yeah, 104. But it's great because that means Tea Party to establishment, from social conservative to libertarian, we would all, because what people want more than anything is they don't just want a fighter, they want someone who fights and wins. I think that's really important because there's a lot of great fighters out there, but they don't win. There's a lot of winners out there who don't fight. What people want is someone who fights and wins for the hardworking taxpayers. One of my favorite tweets after I was with Congressman King was somebody said, "I like Walker because he wins without caving." And so that's really important. But the other interesting thing about New Hampshire that ties into this story is not only we win with almost universal support amongst Republicans, that's not enough to win in my state. We had to carry independents by over 11, almost 12 points. And interesting enough, you don't win the center by running to the center. You win the center by leading. What independents want is not unlike what our base wants, and they want people to stand up and look you in the eye and tell you exactly what you're going to do. They don't have to agree with you on every single issue, but they want someone they know every single day is going to get up and fight hard and then win for them and their family and people just like them across their state. Ultimately, I think they want the same thing here and across the country. So thanks.
Fantastic.